Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Asiri, and each week I meet with military veterans to learn about their civilian career, what they do, how they got there, and advice for other veterans seeking to do the same. Today's episode number 193 with Mark Horstman.
An interview is an artificial reality designed by organizations to keep people out. The primary purpose of an interviewer is to say no. Because if it was to say yes, we wouldn't even interview people. You just accept people and then weed them out in the first 90 to 180 days.
Well, my guest today is quite an impressive background. He has the #1 business podcast in the world with over 1,500 episodes over the last 13 years. He has counseled 2 different presidents. He's worked with countless executives at Fortune 1000 companies, teaching them about how to be effective managers. And sometimes when I hear that, I just kind of brush it off as very vague advice or feel-good advice. I think as you'll see in today's episode, what makes Mark so good at what he does is his tactical approach. He is very, very prescriptive. He is very, very precise. And very data-driven in the advice that he gives. We talk about a lot of things. He worked as a recruiter prior to starting Manager Tools. He provides actionable feedback, tactical steps to get ready to lead in the civilian world. We talk about resumes. We talk about interviews. We talk about telling your stories. And it's very, very actionable. Definitely check out the show notes today at beyondtheuniform.io. He talks about an interviewing series that he has. If I were getting out of the military right now, I would sign up right now. I get no kickback for saying that. It's genuine advice. It's normally $150, and there's an email address in the show notes that if you email, you will get a military discount. He also offered to have his team look at your resume. I would take him up on both of those. I hope to have Mark back on the show again. One other plug, he has a book called The Effective Manager. I am reading it, but have not yet finished it, but highly recommend it. You do get a free audiobook as a listener Beyond the Uniform. If you go to the website, you'll see that offer in the show notes. You get a free audiobook, and it could be The Effective Manager absolutely for free. Full disclosure, Beyond the Uniform gets $15 to help with the production costs for every sign up, regardless of whether you go on to be a paying member. So check that out. One other plug is there is a video that I reference in this. It's a video that's called What You've Been Taught About Management is Wrong. And Mark is the presenter in that video. I have watched this multiple times. I've shared it with my team at Schatzer. I have brought it up in meetings multiple times. There is so much great feedback packed into those 20 minutes. So check out that video as well. So with that, let's dive into my conversation with Mark Horstman. Joining me today in Pebble Beach, California is Mark Horstman. Mark, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Thanks, Justin. Happy to be here.
So I wanted to give listeners a quick background. Mark is the co-founder of Manager Tools, a management consulting and training firm that regularly consults to and trains managers in Fortune 1000 companies around the world. His podcast, Manager Tools, has over 800 ratings on iTunes and focuses on specific skills to improve management performance. He started out at West Point and served as an Army officer for 5 years. He and his co-founder, who's also a West Point graduate, have run Manager Tools for nearly 14 years. And this is the thing I think is the most incredible. His podcast is listened to over 1.2 million times per month in every country in the world except for North Korea. And he is the author of the book, The Effective Manager. So, Mark, before I dive into questions, anything to add to or amend to that intro?
Yeah, there's a couple of things actually, Justin. One, the data on listen's a little old. We're about to 2 million a month now.
Jeez.
And I think that has something to do with podcasting has gotten more popular in the last couple of years. And the other thing is, I did not know we had 800 ratings on iTunes. I didn't know. I thought we had somewhere around 500.
Yep.
So that's good to hear.
It may be a metric that you only look at if you run your own podcast, but I had looked there, and that's just that's an incredible number of reviews. So it's one of many indications of the impact of the work that you're doing.
We got very lucky. I will say this. There's a long lead into the story about how Mike Ozan and I, who's also a classmate of mine, by the way, we served together in the Army. We knew each other at school. I helped him get out of the Army, and Mike and I started the podcast. Literally, our first podcast landed the day before or the day after iTunes announced support or implemented support for podcasts.
Wow.
So we were very fortunate timing wise that we were essentially an early adopter, almost bleeding edge. And it is now, if you look around, it's the number one business podcast in the world. I don't consider news shows like Wall Street Journal really necessarily about business. But we're humbled and pleased. And the fact that we can help, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people all over the world don't do what we did when we were young professionals. People don't have to go through that misery. I think we have close to 1,500 podcasts. We've been doing it we just passed our 13-year anniversary. We do it every week. And we have two casts, Manager Tools and also Career Tools. Manager Tools is for managing people, and Career Tools is for everybody, about managing your professional life and so on.
That's incredible. So you started the podcast. Was it about a year after you started the company?
Well, sort of. Probably a little bit of background here. Went to the academy, studied mechanical engineering, got out, 5 years in the Army, served in Hawaii and Fort Hood in Texas, and then also did some work in South America. Got out, went to work at Procter & Gamble, sold toothpaste, did very well, and left there to become a recruiter for a couple of years, which is hopefully helpful to your audience, because I help thousands of young military officers get out. This is a long, long time ago, though, folks. And then left there, started my own consulting firm. And Horstman and Company was the predecessor to Manager Tools. And I had been consulting and training for years all over the country, built up the company. And my business partner, Mike, said, if he wasn't my business partner at the time, but he said to me, look, I was thinking about being done, just because didn't necessarily need to keep working. And he said, if you stop doing this, a lot of people will stop. People won't hear your guidance about one-on-ones and feedback and how to manage people and how to do it ethically, how to do it professionally. And he said, one day he said to me, hey, we should start a podcast. This was in January of 2005. His wife had given him an iPod at Christmas 2004, and he had done some research about it. And he says, oh yeah. He says, I tell you what we should do. We should do a podcast. And I said, okay. And then I said, what's a podcast? And he said, it's the thing it is. And I said, okay. And he came up with like a 6-month plan for how we were going to get the sound files right and do all this other stuff. And I said, well, first of all, let's go down to Best Buy, buy a microphone, plug it into the side of your laptop, and talk to one another about management and see whether or not we think that'll work. And it turned out worked pretty well. We're surprised. The two things that people tell us about the podcast: number one, it's actionable. When your listeners start getting out, when they're thinking about getting out of the service, one of the frustrating things is you can read all kinds of people who will talk to you, listen to people about guidance and suggestions and recommendations and advice. But when you try to fight through what they're suggesting, there's often nothing there. People say things like be aggressive, be determined, be patient. Almost anytime someone tells you how to be, it's not really a recommendation, because being is a state of mind rather than doing, which is an activity. And so what frustrates people is you read business books, you read management books when you get out, and they don't really tell you what to do when you're finished reading the book. They're not actionable. So every one of our podcasts specifically actionable only because, very clear, our market research was Mike and I. We didn't want to read or listen to anything that didn't tell us what to do, that didn't have a point of view, that didn't have, usually for us, because we're both engineers, data to support it. So the first thing people like is it's actionable. We tell you, hey, we think you should get to know your directs. As an example, probably our most popular series of podcasts on one-on-ones. We say, you got to have a good relationship with your directs. Well, now everybody will tell you that. But we actually say, and here's how you do it. And we've tested like 17 different versions of this. You sit down with them once a week for a half an hour. That's all you need. And you talk to them. You let them go first. They bring up their issues. Then you've got some time to bring up your issues. And what people say is, wow, I got to know my people. And you helped me do it because you told me what to do rather than just saying, I need to be close to my people. Because you can tell people be close to your people all you want, but they don't know. What do I do? I feel like I know my people. No, here's what you do. And then when this happens, we have podcasts on all kinds of things. We have a podcast called What to Do If One of Your Directs Has Body Odor. Because if you're a manager and you've never dealt with that before and you screw up that conversation, you're gonna mess things up in your team for probably a month or two. And it sounds really cheesy, but believe me, I got asked that question once a month for 10 years of my life. And I would sit down and tell people, here's what I think. Well, we finally tested 3 or 4 different ways of doing it and then published in the podcast the way to do it. Now, do I want everybody to listen to that podcast? No, but I want you to know it's there when you have to have the conversation, and just do what we tell you to do. So actionable is the first thing. And the second thing is sheer luck, Justin. People say, I really like the way you and Mike talk to one another. And, there wasn't really a decision about that. We decided to sit down in our first instance and we talked to one another about management and listened to the recording and said, that's not horrible. And what's evolved now is that every one of our podcasts has show notes. I write a white paper somewhere between 3 and 10 pages long that if you read it and you didn't know there was a podcast associated with it, the white paper would be actionable guidance. It is 98% of what's in the podcast. Mike and I share the show notes with him, this white paper thing, and we both have it in front of us, and we record the podcast, and we just talk to what we're reading about without reading the show notes, because that would be really boring. And usually Mike interviews me, and he talks for about maybe 10% of the podcast, and I end up doing 90% of the talking because I wrote the show notes. And this is what I've been doing for the past 25 years of my life, is helping people become better managers. So that's a very long answer.
No, I love it. I love it. And for listeners in the show notes at beyondtheuniform.io, I'll include a couple of links. One of them is a video. It's about a 20-minute video I watched last week. It's called "What You've Been Taught About Management Is Wrong." And
I'm
Mark,
famous for that one.
Yeah, I've shared that with my team for my day job, and I have referenced it in at least 3 different meetings, and a lot stood out. But just one example is you talk about how people need to have a very clear view of what the 3 things that matter for them to succeed and how rare that is. And I that's one of the things I've been reiterating with our team is not only as a team, but for each person to have that clarity. And it's just filled with a lot of very tactical nuggets. And my experience in the military, and I think many veterans would empathize with this, I think I excel at execution and tactics. I love to be able to just get my hands dirty and do things. And so I think one of the things that resonates with your book, with that video, with your podcast, is you do get into the nuts and bolts. And I think that will connect with so many listeners to Beyond the Uniform, because I'm just guessing that you're hungry for actionable steps rather than just the platitudes and generic advice that you could interpret in 1,000 different ways. And that's one of the things I've really appreciated about your content is how specific and actionable it is.
Yeah, I got sick of the platitudes, frankly.
Yeah.
And at some point I got a little cynical, to be honest. There's an alter ego that every once in a while takes over on the podcast, and our listeners have dubbed me Dark Mark, because every once in a while, I just say, look at these people. They're acting as if they're management experts, but First of all, they never manage anybody.
Mm.
And second, you can't really dig through and say what to do.
Yep.
I mean, you mentioned my book, The Effective Manager. It says, okay, I'm going to tell you to do 4 things. Do one-on-ones, do feedback this way. This is the way you coach. Most people grossly misunderstand what coaching is. And you also need to learn how to delegate. And for instance, in the one-on-one section, which I will tell you, we've been asked to train the 82nd Airborne Division, the 101st Airborne Division. I've been asked to go to Iraq. I've been asked to go to Afghanistan. We've got battalion and brigade commanders in the regular Army now using our guidance for one-on-ones. Colonels teaching majors, teaching captains, teaching lieutenants. Lieutenants expected to do one-on-ones with their platoon sergeant. Platoon sergeants expected to do it with the squad leaders. Squad leaders expected to do them with their squads. And it's really simple. In the book we say, and by the way, guys, you don't have to read my book. You don't. You can get it on Amazon, but you don't have to, because the podcasts are free. People ask us for free stuff all the time. Hey, can I have this? Can I have that? I said, no, the podcasts are free. The reason the podcasts are free is there are a lot of managers in the world. And heck, there are a lot of service members who probably can't afford it. But you can learn everything that we teach anybody that we charge for by listening to our podcast. And there is no qualitative difference. We don't hold anything back. It's, do this. So when it comes to one-on-ones, we say, okay, you're going to do one-on-ones with your directs. Now, we're going to teach you what it is. So it's a scheduled meeting. It's weekly. It's a half an hour long. You don't need any more than that. Your direct goes first, and you take notes, okay? Handwritten notes. That's it. So you could do it in the field. I've seen officers in the 82nd doing one-on-ones, sitting on top of their, what we used to call steel pot, their hat, their helmet, doing one-on-ones in the field with soldiers. And if we transition that to when you're on post or when you're working in a large organization, it looks virtually identical. You send out an email. We actually tell you, you can come to our website and you can download a draft of the email. You email everybody on your team and you say, I want to get to know you better. I want to build a more trusting relationship with you. And the only human way known to do that, I don't care what any technologist tells you. And by the way, I live in California. I'm in Silicon Valley all the time. The CIO of a gigantic Australian university and I, who's a longtime client, are having lunch today at the lodge at Pebble Beach to catch up on some work. So we love technology here, but technology will not make you a better relator to other people. So you got to sit down face to face. Now, if your team is dispersed, like mine is, I don't have anybody here. We don't have offices in our company thanks to digital technology. So you use Skype or you use the phone, and that works great. And we have data about how good they work and why they work and so on. But you're going to schedule it. You're going to send out an email and say, I want to start doing this. And let's say you have 5 guys working for you. You send out an email and you send those 5 guys 8 slots to pick from. You look at your calendar a month from now. Now, a bunch of people are listening right now and saying, no, I don't have time for that. Well, that's crap. I'm telling you right now. I've taught 2 U.S. presidents to do one-on-ones. We've got about 50 CEOs of Fortune 1000 companies doing one-on-ones our way. There are many more doing one-on-ones. They just don't do them necessarily precisely our way. You absolutely have time. And if you're worried that your calendar is full right now, I can prove to you you're not that busy. Look at your calendar a month from now. There's nothing on it. When people say they're busy, it's fascinating, Justin. People say they're busy. I say, look, the President of the United States, his calendar, we're recording this in July, his calendar is full through Christmas in 15-minute blocks of time. That's busy, okay? So when people say I'm busy, I say, no, the president's busy. You're not. CEOs are busy. A great article recently in Harvard Business Review that I think is available to everybody about what CEOs do with their time. You know what the average CEO, I think they had about 100 CEOs in their survey, they work 60 hours a week. These people who are working 80 hours a week, I'm not saying when you're in the field you're not working 80 to 100 hours a week, but in non-deployed time and the corporate world, you don't need to be working those ungodly hours, which is good because your family ought to come first. But anyway, you schedule it with your directs. So you send their 5 directs 8 times, and you say, pick one of these times. First come, first served. Now, the beauty of that is the 5th guy who picks still has an opportunity to choose different times. But when you look at your calendar a month from now to pick times to start the one-on-ones, and by the way, that guidance applies to almost anything. If you want to start something new, a fundamental change in how you do it, what you want to do is start now and plan to begin taking action in 4 weeks by putting stuff on your calendar. That way, you'll always have time for things. People aren't actually busy. They're just swallowed up with urgent, and their calendar gets filled up day to day, week to week, about 5 to 7 to 8 days in advance. Most people know what they're doing on their calendar tomorrow, but they have no idea what they're doing 2 weeks from next Tuesday. Believe me, if you're a CEO, if you're a senior VP, if you're an EVP, you know, because that time's already spoken for. So you schedule the time. And look, guys, I know people are saying, oh, I can't do that. My schedule's too flexible. Look, this is a meeting just like any other meeting. When your boss pings you and says, you got to be in my office in 5 minutes, you say, okay, and you text your direct and say, hey, I'm sorry, the boss wants me. Let's rearrange. Mm-hmm. That's the inevitability of modern electronic calendarization and so on. So you're going to send an email. Oh, by the way, between the time the email goes out and people respond, and believe me, people will respond, and before you start one-on-ones, you give them a little briefing, and you can come to our website and download a little PowerPoint and make copies for everybody if you like, if you want to kill some trees, or just present it electronically and say, hey, guys, this is what I'm doing. This is why I'm doing it. I'm not going to be good at it when I start because no human being is good at anything when they start. But I'm going to do this every week, and I'm going to stick to it because I want a great relationship with you, because I know that the more trust we have, the more we know each other, the better results we're going to be. Now, for those people in the audience who are saying, as an example, I think I know my people pretty well. Here's a simple test. Can you name the first names of all of the children of everyone who reports directly to you? And if you can't do that, your belief that you know your people well is total crap, because the people who know me well know all my kids' names, and I have 7 kids. They know my kids' names, and they ask about my kids' names. If you don't know, what makes us think that we can get the last full measure of work devotion from a subordinate, pardon the term, when they know we don't know the names of the people most precious in the world to them? It won't happen, and we have data to support that too, Mike and I being engineers. So you don't know your people as well as you think. And full disclosure, guys, I don't want to point a finger at you. This was true of me early in my career. I didn't know this either. West Point didn't teach me. I learned a great deal in my first assignment, but not about this kind of stuff. So anyway, you send the email, you give them a briefing, and you sit down, and it's scheduled, and it's weekly, and you let the direct go first. And they can talk about anything they want, and then you'll probably want to talk about stuff. What most directs want to talk about is work. 79% of the subordinate in the conversation want to talk about work, and 86% of bosses want to talk about work. So you're not going to get very often into really weird or unusual conversations. And you're going to find that a weekly check-in on all the projects and all the work that people are doing and so on is a great way to keep from slipping further behind and not having time to check on things and so on. So my point with that long story, again, I feel like I'm filibustering here. My point with that is to give you, your audience, a level of understanding of the detail that we put in there, because that's what I would want. I mean, I would want to know, okay, how do I get these things started? What email do I send? What's the PowerPoint look like? And again, all that stuff's free.
I mean, I love that. I appreciate the, it's like bumper bowling for managers. I love that you have templates for all of these. That makes it so actionable. But I also appreciate the kind of the tolerance that you have when you're talking about this, where you're scheduling it 4 weeks out, which is much more realistic. It's one less reason to put this off.
Yep.
But also the things like, a meeting comes up, you text and you reschedule, or I appreciate the explaining it to one's team or employees about like, hey, this is a learning process. It just makes it less intimidating and makes it more about a process that continues to evolve over time. And I think that makes it much more sustainable.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned bumper bowling. I did not know what bumper bowling was until about a month ago. Somebody said bumper bowling to me. It's like bumper bowling. And I said, what are you talking about? Is it a new game? Like, is it impossible to understand, like cricket? He said, no, they put these inflatable bumpers in the gutters and I went, oh, that's genius for kids or whatever. That, it's so smart. Yeah, I wouldn't go quite that far. I mean, if you really want to be a bad manager. I can't stop you. But yeah, but let me put it differently. If you really want to be a good boss, and we make a distinction between managing, and leading. There are some people who will say you should call your podcast Leader Tools because it's about people. And I say, oh, now we're going to get into a conversation about leading and managing and how they're different. And we have an opinion, but all that we do is think about, if you have people reporting to you in an organization, whether your organization is 2 or your organization is 100,000 or 500,000 or 750,000. I just had dinner a few weeks ago with the general counsel of General Motors, Craig Glidden. Doesn't matter how big the organization is. If you have direct reports, and for those listeners, if you haven't heard that before, I hope that didn't surprise anybody, concern anybody. The phrase direct reports in corporate America, in large organizations, is a standard phrase. It avoids subordinate, and it's those people who report directly to you. Now, if you, as an example from my Army experience, if you're a company commander, your platoon leaders, if you're an infantry guy, your platoon leaders are your direct reports. And obviously your first sergeant is a direct report. On the other hand, the squad members are not directs, right? They don't report directly to you. You'd have to skip somebody in the org chart to get to them. So if you hear me using the word direct reports or directs, that's just standard corporate lingo there. But I just, over and over again, I find this people don't, the military, one of the things the military taught me is about people. There's a sign on Building 121 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, when I went to Officer Basic, that just struck me. It says, mission first, people always. And people, when I tell people that aren't in the military, they're like, well, that's confusing. I said, well, no, it's not confusing. It's absolutely clear, but it's hard. You have to do both. You have to get the work done, and you have to take care of your people. And there are far too many managers that think that they just want to be managers. They don't want to be leaders, so they're not going to do people stuff. And then there are other people who say, oh, I'm a leader. I don't want to worry myself with details. It doesn't work that way. You have to be able to do both. And despite the fact that I'm not naturally a people person, I'm kind of an engineer and not necessarily a nice guy day to day. But the most important thing I know about management is the stronger your relationship with your direct reports, the greater your productivity will be. And that is the highest correlation of anything we ever tested. We probably tested like 40 or 50 different variables to determine which makes most difference. And the managers who score highest on trust, my people trust me, as determined by the directs, are the ones who tend to do best. So we teach managing from the standpoint of a manager's role, but that means both people stuff and process stuff and project management. We just put out a podcast about how to onboard a new hire, and associated with it, for those people who license our show notes. By the way, I should have been clear. The podcasts are free, but the show notes are not. And if you're a licensee, you get a spreadsheet, a live spreadsheet that has every single task we talked about, and I think there are 80 of them, and some logic in the spreadsheet that will tell you, hey, put in the date you hired the guy and the date he accepted, and it will fill out, it will give you logic of all the dates of the 80 tasks and when they should be done. And then all you have to do is open your spreadsheet and you can keep track of things. Now, that's not very people-y. I think some people would say that's very managey. But then we also talked about how important it is to have trust. So both sides of the coin.
What about, one of the things I was thinking about most when I was thinking of chatting with you today was so many of the listeners to the podcast, they're on active duty right now. They're thinking of getting out in the next 3 months, maybe 2 years. And one thing I was most curious about is, what are the differences you've seen or experienced between leading and managing in the military versus outside? Like, what do they need to anticipate that's going to change when they take off their uniform and they start leading within a civilian team organization?
It's just not that different. Okay. Now, you'll have other people say it's very different, and it just depends on what your perspective is. And you can describe things that are very different, and then you can describe things that are not. I'm not the perfect guy to ask that question because I came out of the Army in 1987. I joined, I graduated in 82, and the Army that I joined was nowhere near as professional as the Army of today. It is a better force, and it's not even a better force. It's a order of magnitude better force. It almost embarrasses me to think about, we were professionals, but the modern force today is so impressive. I get choked up about it. My nephew just graduated from the academy. I think it's been 3 years ago now. I went to his graduation, and of course, as an old grad, if you've got any graduates listening, there's an old phrase: the Corps has gone to hell, because it always gets easier, it never gets harder. And I used to kid him that, oh, you guys doing this, plebe year? And he says, no. Are you doing this? I said, oh man, you guys, you're getting over it. It's so easy. You're not working hard. On the other hand, I looked him in the eyes on graduation day. I said, you're better prepared to be a lieutenant in today's Army than I was prepared to be a lieutenant when I graduated, which would be the purpose of West Point. So from in terms of the differences, they're not that big a deal. And let me answer the question a little differently. Who cares what the differences are? Let me make some suggestions about what your listeners should do. Okay. So you need to get a suit. Okay. I'm going to ask you to spend a little bit of money here. You get a suit. You don't need to spend a lot of money. Go to Men's Warehouse. Okay. Ladies, get a black pantsuit, wear a cream blouse. Okay. Not a lot of jewelry. Okay. Black shoes, shine. You don't need fancy. Okay. Gentlemen, blue suit, white shirt, red tie. Ladies, blue or black pantsuit, cream or white blouse. That's it. Okay. Don't worry about your hair. Your hair is fine. Okay. Don't try to grow your hair out. You don't need to do that. Okay. You need to do some reading. I worked for a couple of years at a junior military officer recruiting firm, and there's a book on Amazon called PCS to Corporate America. My old boss wrote it, and I helped him edit it, and it gives you real good preparation for interviewing. We also have a product called the Interviewing Series. We do charge for it. It's $150. If you've got a listener that wants to email customerservice@manager-tools.com and say, hey, I'm a listener to Just in the Series podcast, and I heard about this thing. Can you give me a discount because I'm military? We will, period. So just write us and tell us. And we'll tell you every single thing that you need to do to prepare, okay? Some things you need to do. You need to get your resume right. And we have an example resume. If you're a listener and you want to send us your resume and have us look at it and make some recommendations, fine. I can promise you what you are being told about resumes is crap. You do not need to civilianize your resume. You don't. Okay. What ends up happening is you don't know the civilian language and you write stuff that is just laughable. And writing about a platoon or a company as if it's a business entity is weird. I mean, it's just weird. And I've probably seen in my career 10,000, 20,000 military resumes, and maybe 5% are good. But it's not hard. Follow our guidance. We have something called the Resume Workbook. It's like 60 pages, but it will tell you every single period, what the format is, and so on. Classic mistake, using bullets to list what your job responsibilities are. That's not the way you do it. If you think that's the way you do your resume, you need to listen to our podcast. And the podcast, again, is free. I think the original title of the podcast was one of our funny titles called Your Resume Stinks. And we weren't writing about military resumes. We were writing about all resumes. And yes, you can't have any spelling errors in it and so on. You need to learn to write a cover letter. And if you don't know what a cover letter is, that's okay. We'll explain it to you, and we'll tell you exactly what to put in the 3 paragraphs of the cover letter. Okay. You need to start doing some preparation for the interview, and that means learning a valuable lesson about interviewing. You're not, when you get interviewed by a company, interviewing the company. When people tell you this, they're insane. Okay? These people should be drummed out of professional life. This is ludicrous. If you interview with me to come to work for me, believe me, this interview is all about you. This is not a meeting of equals. And if that bothers you, go and interview somewhere else. I'm the owner. You're going to work for me, and you think you're going to interview me? No. You read this stuff. Listen, I'll tell you something. 99% of what you can read on the web about interviewing preparation, particularly the popular ones, and there's one, this gal named Liz Ryan, who is a LinkedIn person. She's crazy. I mean, she has the worst advice. She says when you get a question you can't answer, you should turn it around on the recruiter and you should ask them questions. Folks, you try to turn around an interviewing question that I ask you, that I've prepared for my interview with you, and I ask you a question like, give me an example of a complex situation where you had to come up with a plan, you had to adjust the plan, and maybe go back and get more budget, and then you saw it through to completion. And the person says something like, well, Mark, I can't really remember off the top of my head, but I was thinking, perhaps this is a good time for you to share with me one of your more complicated things. I would look at them and say, why? I have a job. You're the one that wants a job. Why should we talk about me? The primary misconception about interviewing is that it's a two-way street. It's not a two-way street. Interviewing is about getting offers that you can either accept or decline. Once you have an offer, now it's your turn to interview us. On the other hand, because the interview really is over, what you're going to have with us if you get an offer is a conversation. But I would expect, let's say, Justin, you interviewed with us and I offered you, and I think, you're a great guy. Can't wait to have you on my team. And then I make you an offer. And by the way, there's a definition of an offer, folks. And in the interviewing series, it tells you what the definition is. It says it's a salary, it's a location, it's a job title, and it's also a deadline for the decision, okay? If somebody says to you in an interview, I can see you working here, there's no question, how do you feel about that? And the person says, yeah, I could totally see it. And then they walk out of the interview and tell somebody, I've got an offer. No, you don't. No, you don't. It has to have money and a deadline and a location and a job. And it's very specific because the actual definition of an offer is when control passes to the candidate. So if I make you an offer, now you have control. And so you call me up and say, Mark, can we chat about some things I was wondering about? At this point now, I'm a little excited about you. I'm going to say, sure, Justin. How long do you need to talk? I interview 50 people before I hire one. You're so good. If you want 3 hours on my calendar in the next 6 hours, I'll cancel things to spend time with you. But the idea that you're going to interview me while I'm interviewing you, ludicrous. Okay. Now, I would expect that you would evaluate me. You would say, Mark's a nice guy. Mark's not. Mark seems knowledgeable. Mark's not. Whatever. That's fine. But the primary purpose of an interview is for me to decide whether I'm going to offer you a job, not whether I'm going to hire you, because I don't get to hire you. I offer you, and then you accept or decline. So you need to prepare for that by studying your own background. And there's a technique my old boss and I essentially jointly developed called the general store analogy that explains how to go through your background and how to prepare to think about, of the things you've done, what do they prove about your skills? If you did this project in Iraq or Afghanistan or even at Fort Bragg or at Norfolk or at, who knows, Davis Monthan Air Force Base, wherever, if you did this thing, how can you characterize it? And then how can you communicate it? And basically, the podcast explains how to do that. And then you have to practice. You've got to walk around with your phone, and you've got to have a series of the basic questions you ask. We'll tell you the 5 big questions you're going to get asked in an interview. The first one is, tell me about yourself. The next one is, the most important question you're going to get, because you're going to get repeatedly, is, give me an example of a significant accomplishment. Tell me what you did and how you did it. And the interviewing series explains to you, here's the structure you should have. Don't tell us a story. We're not interested in stories. We want to understand your logic, your planning, and then what actually happened. And we want you to deliver it in understandable chunks. Another big question is, what's your leadership or management style, which we talk about guidance on how to do that. And then there's probably some questions about salary and location and so on. So there's a bunch of preparation you need to do before the interview. Okay. Then we talk about all the phases of the interview, the preparation being one phase, but also knocking on the door and shaking hands and smiling and introducing yourself. And then the next phase is the questions the company asks you. And the next phase is the questions you ask them. Any professional interviewer is going to allow you to ask maybe one, maybe two, depending upon how well they manage time, questions of the interviewer. And there are right questions and wrong questions. And the podcast explains that. Then in addition, you got to follow up. And my actual favorite part of the interview is at the end of the interview, when you close, when you say to the person, hey, I want you to know, I really want an offer from Apple. My criteria in looking for companies are A, B, and C, and Apple fits all those beautifully, whatever your criteria might be. All that stuff. I think we have a total of 60 podcasts in the interviewing series. Only 18 of them are protected. So if you don't want to spend a dime, you don't want to talk to us or ask, fine. There's 40 or 50 other podcasts that talk about all kinds of things about the nitty-gritty of interviewing. And I'm very blessed to have had that experience in my career as a recruiter that I can share, this is what to do. And you will, I have hundreds, thousands at this point now after 15 years of emails from people saying, you're not going to believe it. I closed and I got the offer and I accepted. And I write back, why would I not believe it? I'm thrilled for you. And of course, people want to thank us. I'm like, it's not us. We didn't do it. You're the one that followed the guidance. You're the one that listened. You're the one that prepared. You're the one that dotted your I's and crossed your T's and went into the interview. So we've got all kinds of guidance about interviewing. And I want the transition. I tell people all the time about interviewing, Justin. I say, imagine that you're the Heisman Trophy winner in college football and you get drafted first in the NFL. There's no question you can play football. No question. You're a superstar. But the NFL says, hey, by the way, real quick, most people don't know this, but before you get to play football in the NFL, you're going to have to take a test. And you say, sure, what do I need to do? How fast do I need to run? They say, no, we're going to ask you to play tennis. And you say, well, why the heck would I do that? So it doesn't matter. It's just a test. And you say, but I've never played tennis before. Yeah, sorry, you're not going to do very well then, and we can't let you play in the NFL. Now, you're saying this is insane, right? Well, that's exactly what an interview is. An interview is an artificial reality designed by organizations to keep people out. The primary purpose of an interviewer is to say no. Because if it was to say yes, we wouldn't even interview people. You just accept people and then weed them out in the first 90 to 180 days. And you have to, even though if you're a Navy nuclear submariner, if you're a platoon sergeant, if you're a staff sergeant, if you're a gunnery sergeant, if you're a company commander, or if you're a second lieutenant or an ensign, doesn't matter what. You absolutely have the skills, the knowledge, and the drive to perform admirably in entry-level and maybe slightly higher positions in large organizations. And as I'm sure most of your listeners know, there are tons of programs that exist to help corporate America hire more veterans. And there are service conferences and so on where you can go and talk to companies. Okay. And you have to get through the interview. Okay. You have to prepare and you have to get through that interview. And if you don't get through the interview, it doesn't matter how good of a salesman you've been, manufacturing supervisor you would have been. So if you're thinking about getting on in the next 3 months, I hate to tell you this, but I'm famous for telling people stuff they don't like hearing, but I'm going to tell you the truth. That's the one thing. I'm not going to blow smoke at people. If you're thinking about getting out in 3 months, you're behind. If you don't know some of the stuff I just said, you're behind. Get the book, listen to the podcast, not my book, but the book I mentioned from Amazon, and start reading and start preparing. In 3 months, you can become a massively great interviewer, but it's going to take time every day. Okay, it is, and it's going to take time on the weekends. Now, thanks to our phones. When I started teaching this stuff 20 years ago, we didn't have it. We had to have video cameras, but now you can video yourself answers to the big questions. Tell me about yourself, leadership style, and so on. And tell me about yourself is the first big question in an interview, and we actually talk about how to answer it in the podcast. Again, I'm filibustering. I'm sorry.
No, this is great. I love all the advice that you're giving here. And for listeners in the show notes, I'll have links to the PCS to Corporate America book and the Your Resume Stinks episode. And I really appreciate that offer of a discount for the interviewing series. It sounds like fantastic. Just every single thing they need to know. And one thing just kind of on interviewing I wanted to ask you about is in the 180 plus interviews I've done at this point with veterans about their civilian career, one of the common themes that surprised me that keeps on coming up is how difficult most veterans find to sell themselves in an interview, or how to boast about their accomplishments or their team. It's kind of a common problem, and I get it. I get that the background we come from, most people are humble about their accomplishments. Most people will talk about their team and be comfortable boasting about a team's accomplishment, but downplay their own. And I'm just curious if anything stands out as advice for how to advocate for oneself in an interview in a way that doesn't overdo it, but also doesn't undersell oneself.
Yeah, I'm probably not the best guy to ask that, because I don't believe I don't think we're advocating for ourselves. I don't think we're boasting. It is not boasting. There's an old saying in Texas where I used to live: it ain't bragging if you done it. Interviewing is not boasting. People who are, look, I want, please share that email address with listeners and somebody write me. And let's have a conversation about that. It's ludicrous. Okay. If you're, I'll give you an example from the business world. Let's say, Justin, you're the vice president of our division and I'm a director in the division. So I report to somebody who reports to you. And I've identified a potential new product. Let's say we're in product development. I'm making this up. I've identified a new product based on a bunch of conversations I just had with customers out in the field, because I just went on a 3-week trip around the country learning about customers and so on. And the customers all said, we really need more of this and less of that. And I said, okay, come back. Now, look, you sent me out. I just talked to a bunch of customers. I learned a bunch of stuff. Should I come into you and say, oh, well, I'm not sure whether or not this is boasting, but here's what I know. Oh, I need to be humble about this. This is not a question of humbleness or boasting or advocating. This is a question of truth. That's all it is. It's truth. And so if let's take it to the interview. You're interviewing me. If I was the number one salesperson in the country at Procter & Gamble, folks, that's not boasting. Now, if I go around telling everybody, my friends here in Pebble Beach, yeah, that's boasting. Okay, it was so long ago, it wouldn't be a good boast. But that's not, I mean, if in fact we are going to agree that people get stressed out about interviewing, that sounds to me like somebody looking for something to get stressed out about. If you're going to get stressed out about interviewing because, golly gee, I don't know how to do it, I don't know how to do it well, but I really want what's on the other side of it, the moment you say I really want what's on the other side of it, which is a job opportunity, okay, then you have to say, I need to play by the rules. What do I know about the interviewing rules? They're going to ask me questions about me. The idea that you're going to wiggle and squirm because you don't want to talk about yourself, that's more of a personality weakness. I mean, if you're my boss and you say to me, Mark, I've got 2 people I want to consider for promotion, and you're one of them, and I want you to sit down and make the case for me, I can say humbly, Justin, here are the things I did this year. You remember that project on this? I did this and this and this. My team did this and this and this. This is not bragging. This is just truth. Okay. And by the way, I do think, as a tactical matter, if you follow our guidance about how to create accomplishment bullets on your resume, you will discover that the interview doesn't feel like bragging. It feels like an explication of your resume. You will have already done the work and built the answers to these tough questions, and they will come out as a description of what happened and what you did, rather than as I'm bragging. And so some of the bragging, I think, would come from I feel like I'm making myself look good. I actually don't think you need to make yourself look good. I think you need to explain to people what happened. If you're in a combat area and you're calling in fire and you're directing your team and you're dragging someone away from a dugout area because he's injured, saying those things is not bragging. And it really isn't. So the preparation of the answers and understanding what you did and why you did it, and being able to describe it, I don't think it's bragging. Let me give you an example. I'm going to filibuster again here. I used to live in Texas, still have a lot of Texas in my heart. And when I was there, the Cowboys won a bunch of Super Bowls. And Emmitt Smith won the Super Bowl MVP. Now, Emmitt Smith's a good guy, and he's actually not a braggart person. He's a regular guy, good guy. And if Emmitt Smith got asked, tell me your most significant accomplishment, this is what he would say. My most significant professional accomplishment was I was named the Super Bowl MVP in our winning of Super Bowl, whatever it was, 35. Let me give you a little bit of background. We went into the game with a very clear game plan, and there were three things I needed to do. One was be in the best possible condition. Fortunately, we had 2 weeks off. The second thing was I had to learn about 13 new plays for this particular team we were playing against. And lastly, I had to execute my responsibilities on each play flawlessly. Here's how I did each of those things. Blah, 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 blah. And thanks to that, and obviously my teammates who blocked well, and Michael Irvin who caught some passes, which opened up more running lanes for me as this defense stepped away from the line to protect against deep balls. I was honored and humbled and privileged to be named Super Bowl MVP, which is my greatest achievement. I'm sorry, that's not bragging. Mm-hmm. Somebody asked you a question about an important accomplishment. It is not advocating for yourself. You're not selling anyone, okay? You're talking about something you did. That's all, okay? Now look, if you say in the interview, I heroically crawled through enemy fire to grab this man and dragged him while he was unconscious back, risking life and limb for my team. Okay, that's bragging. All right? But nobody talks that way in an interview. I've interviewed 10,000 people in my life. No one talks that way. Mm-hmm. Or 50 people out of 10,000 talk that way, which is a rounding error that doesn't matter. And they're weird, and we said no to them. We probably truncated the interview because they were so weird. So I just don't think that's a problem. Now, if people don't know what interviewing is about and they don't understand what questions are coming, and I've just told you what most of the question, you're going to give me an example of a significant accomplishment, or tell me about a time when you did X, or can you describe a situation where you did Y? And by the way, those are coming from the recruiter trying to predict what you would do in similar situations in the job they're thinking about you taking. You're going to get that question over and over and over again. If you're not prepared for those things, it might feel like you're bragging, but that's a question of lack of preparation. Mm-hmm. It's not a question with advocating or bragging or any of that sort of stuff. There's nothing wrong with being humble. If you're a humble person, that humility will come across. But you can't be so humble as to simply leave out your accomplishments, because that's not truthful. It's just not. Mm-hmm. If I were the sales representative of the year at Procter & Gamble and I didn't say that, I said, well, I had a good year. That's false modesty. Business and the military, I mean, it relies on integrity. If are you where you say you are? Did you do what you say you did? And so I don't, I'm feeling like it's a false concern. If you're well prepared, it won't feel like bragging.
Mm. This is so exceptional, and Mark, you've covered so much ground today, and for listeners, you got a very small taste of Mark's knowledge today, but we're out of time now. But if you go to manager-tools.com, there'll be links to that in the show notes as well. You'll find his podcast, you'll find his trainings and products and tools and a lot more information. But I think that what jumps out from this interview is the wealth of experience Mark has, but how he funnels it into very tactical, very actionable steps. And I think that's what really sets him apart and has made his program such a success. And so I hope that you've enjoyed this, and we'll check out his show. And Mark, I just really am grateful for your time. I know you have a lot of very high profile people calling on you, and so it means a lot that you would take the time to share this with the Beyond the Uniform audience.
It's my pleasure, Justin. I'm so blessed to live in a country that has military service members as professional and as caring and as hardworking as the ones we have. And when people tell me, when they hear that I went to school and was in the Army, oh, thanks for your service. And I feel like it's a pale imitation for what guys have done in the last 15, 20 years. And if there's something I can do, I'd be happy to do it. I'll offer you, if you want me to come back on and spend the entire show talking about how to answer, tell me about yourself, that big core question, we'll do it. We'll explicate every single bit. We'll tell them what to do, how to do it, how to prepare, what it should sound like, and so on. And gosh, West Point and the Army gave me so much. The fact that I can think that a little bit I'm giving back, I'm blessed. So thank you.
That's great, and I'll take you up on that. I really appreciate it.
Okay. Thanks, Justin.
Surface, surface, surface.
All right, let me know what you think of this episode. I would love to have Mark back on the show, so if you enjoyed this, let me know. I'll get him back on, and we will talk about how to tell your story. I think that would be fantastic for us to hear as a group. And keep the feedback coming. I'm at justin@beyondtheuniform.io. You can find me on LinkedIn. I probably will take 3 weeks to get back to you. I promise you I will get back to you, and the feedback means a lot. Have a great week, and I'll be back next week with more interviews with military veterans about their civilian career. Take care.